picking up where we last left off, we want to persist data beyond our session. So we want to use data in our application that is basically synced to the cloud. So, behind the scenes it's using a database, so we won't really go into the specifics of that. But basically, we want a user to be able to reload the page, still have their information be remembered, as well as other users loading the app for the first time on their page to be able to see a list of updates as well. So in this case, we are going to create a list of tweets in our application. So to get started with that, I'm going to remove the code that we did last time. I'll leave our helpers template code right here the same, but I'm going to remove count because we're going to get rid of that. And then I'm also going to remove the body of our click button function. So we're still going to use the button, and we're still going to have a click on that, but the core of the code is going to change. So the first thing we need to do is a collection, unlike a session, is basically an array. So it's a list of objects inside of it. Fundamentally, that's all any sort of app really is. You have a list of tweets, a list of users, a list of statuses, a list of grams, a list of restaurants, right? Ultimately, every app is really just these collections, these lists, and then those collections reference each other. So today, we are just going to create a simple collection of tweets, and we will push new tweet objects into that collection, and we'll show that value in our HTML. So the first thing we need to do is we need to update our HTML to be able to show a list of data. Normally, before we just said count, and that was fine for just one variable, a number. But we need to actually generate an additional block of HTML for every single tweet that we have. So to do that, we're going to use a new syntax. We're going to use the each syntax. And then I'm just going to put the word collection right here, and I'll get back to that in a second. And then we would do /each. And let's do an li here. And we'll just say text. Okay, so I just did a bunch of stuff at once, and it'll be easier for me to explain with all of it typed out like this. So the first thing is this new keyword, each. Each is basically saying, hey, for every value in this collection that's being returned by a helper, I want to generate this block of code. And then within this, within this block of HTML, each of those items in the collection will have a text value on that object. So in this case, if we have a collection of tweets, each tweet has a field on it called text. So we will generate a separate li element for each tweet and then put the value of its text inside of that li. In case you're a little rusty with your HTML, li stands for list item. So we're basically just trying to show a list in our HTML right now. Now, if we go to our app, it's not going to show anything because we haven't built the helper for this yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll do a collection. So we'll say collection, and then we'll make our helper function. So remember, whenever you have a helper function, you'll reference it by the name here on the left. So it's field on this object that we're passing into helpers. So in this case, the field name is collection. So that's what I used over here. So I'm saying for each object in our collection. Now, I'm not going to jump into the collection right away. I'm just going to do a vanilla JavaScript array because it will be easier to demonstrate. We'll say return, and I'm going to put this on a new line just to make it easier to read. And then within this array, we'll have a couple objects with a text field. So we'll say text, first object, and then I'll put another object in here, We'll say text second object. Okay, so this looks like a real mess right here. So let's clean this up on our formatting a little bit. So the square brackets, if you're rusty with your JavaScript, that means array. An array is a list of items, in this case objects. The curly brace means object. So this is one object right here, and it has a field called text with a string that says write object. Down here, this is our second object with a field called text with a string inside of it that says second object. So I'm going to clean up the formatting a little bit here. So I'll hit enter there. And now I'm going to actually put this on a separate line. So all I did was I just went to the object syntax you're probably more used to seeing, where the curly braces are each on their own line, and then you have these fields inside of it. So now I'll do that for this one as well. Okay. So I know this syntax is a lot to digest. Actually, I'll just put my return up here to make it easier to read. All right. So the collection is a function. It's a helper function, and we're returning an array. So everything between these two hard braces is our array. Our array has two things inside of it. Here's the first thing, one object. Then it's separated by a comma to list our second object here. Both objects have a field named text on them. So now that we've built out this helper function, this collection should be available to our spacebars within our HTML. So for each of these objects inside of this array, we will generate a separate li HTML block. Here we go. You see first object and second object. Excellent. Now, this isn't very useful for us though, because this array isn't dynamic. There's no way for us to change it, and it's not persisted to the cloud. So if we want to if we want to get our data to be persisted, we're going to need to use the Meteor collection. So in this case, I'm going to call our collection tweets, and we'll go ahead and make that now. So we'll say tasks equals new Mongo.collection tasks. Okay, so what did I just do? Well, I created a variable called tasks that is a list of persisted tasks in our app. Here's the syntax for that. Don't worry about too much what it all means, or at least the nitty-gritty components of the collection. Just know that this is usually the format you'll use. You'll have something called, if you have task items, they're called, I just realized, I said I was going to call these things tweets, so I'm actually going to change that right now instead of tasks. So we'll say tweets, and then over here I'm going to change this string to say tweets. So if we have a list of tweets in this case, we'll create a variable named tweets. We'll set equal to a new Mongo collection, and then this string right here on the right should usually be named the same thing as the variable name here on the left. You don't have to do it that way, but the important thing to know is that this string is what identifies your collection in your database. So if we change this to like A, then you would lose everything you had saved into the tweets array. So as a general convention, just name this string the same thing as whatever your variable name is. So we've now created our collection, and now when I'm returning a static array right here, I want to instead return everything that's inside of tweets. And before I jump into that, something you should also notice here is that tweets is outside of our if Meteor is client block. That's because we typically want to also be able to edit our collections on our server as well. So it doesn't need to be wrapped inside of if Meteor is client, right? Since our tweets are persisted to the cloud, they exist on our server and our client. So don't worry too much about the semantics of that. Just know generally you aren't going to put your collections inside of or at least creating your collection inside of an is client block. Okay. So now going back to where we were, we have a collection helper It's a function that returns an array of 2 objects inside of it. Now to do that, to replace our hard-coded array with the objects inside of the collection, we're going to change our syntax here a little bit. So now we're going to say tweets.find. What tweets.find does is it just returns every single tweet object in our collection. So now if we look at our app, let it refresh, we don't have any tweets showing up anymore because we haven't saved anything into our tweets collection here at the top. So where we want to save our new tweet into our tweet collection is inside of our click button event. So just following our data diagram, they're going to click on a button. We will call our event function. We're going to update the data. In this case, add a new tweet object to tweets collection. That will trigger our helper function to rerun, which will put the new tweets into our HTML. So they're going to click on the button, and then that's going to run our click button event here on the right. So in this spot, I want to add a new tweet into tweets collection. And the syntax to do that is very simple. I'll just say tweets.insert. You can see right here, this is a function call on the tweets collection. And in here, I'm just going to input an object. The object will be whatever object we want to add into the collection. So if you remember, we expect every tweet to have a text field on it. So that's what I want to add into our tweet. Any tweet that I add into our tweets collection needs to have the text field on it. So I'll just break it out here to make it clearer. So let's say our tweet looks like this. It's an object, and then it's going to have a text field on it. So this is a persistent tweet. And then down here, I now want to insert that tweet. So I'll just say tweets.insert tweet like that. And if I go into our app now, I should be able to click on this button. And hey, this is a persistent tweet. And we can add a couple of them. They all have the same text, right? Because we're just calling the same click button function over and over again. But if I reload this app now, you can see every one of the tweets is still here. That's because they are now persisted between reload. So if we deployed this to the cloud, they would see the same thing. Every user, that is. Now, let's change this slightly so that instead of just saying, oh, this is a persistent tweet, let's say this is tweet number blah, like number 1, number 2, number 3. So how will we know which tweet number it is? Well, looking at our tweets collection, we can actually just get the count. How many tweets have we added? So if I wanted to do that, let's say var count equals tweets.find. So this grabs every single tweet, and then we want to count how many tweets there are. And then down here in our text for our tweet, we'll say this is tweet number, and then I will say plus count. So this is, So this is tweet number, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So the count will be different each time because we will have added more tweets into this array. So fundamentally what I'm doing is the same. We're still just putting a tweet object into our tweets collection. But now the text will change for each tweet because the count will be different for each one. So go back to our app. We still have all of our persistent tweets in from before, right? If we wanted to delete them, we'd have to go into our database and delete those out. But now when I add a new tweet, we'll say, this is tweet number 5. then tweet number 6, tweet number 7. And so this is a really common pattern where you will dynamically need to, where you will change the new values that you're putting into your collection will change based off either user interaction or the total number of things you've added or other information like that. So I just want to demonstrate that, each of these was a separate object, right? And it's easier to see it with these ones because their number is changing on each of their objects. Now let's say I wanted to update a value. So let's say we just want to update the very first tweet right here. Well, if I wanted to do that, I need to use the update syntax. So instead, we're going to rewire our button a little bit. It's no longer going to add a new tweet into the tweets collection. It's instead just going to update the very first tweet. So how do we get access to the very first tweet? Well, we can say var tweet is equal to tweets.find1. Tweets.find1 basically accesses the very first tweet object that you've put into the collection. Now we need to update this tweet. So to do that, we'll say tweets.update. However, tweets needs to know which item you want to update. Are you updating the first item, the last item? So if the way we do that is we need to pass the ID of the first tweet into the update function. So to do that, I would say tweet._ID. So every single item that you put into a collection has a unique ID generated on it. This _ID field here. And that's what we'll use to index specific objects. Then from there, we will put in basically the new object that we want to represent that very first tweet. So it'll look kind of like the normal syntax when we're inserting, but now we're saying that whatever we put here on the right, whatever this object is, that's what we want to replace the current tweet at that ID, which happens to be the first tweet that we got from the line up here. So now I'll just say text, and we will say I'm updated. And now when we go back to our app, we should be able to click this and the very first tweet should change. And it did. It says I'm updated. Now if we click this again, nothing's going to happen because we're just replacing it to the same text. So even though it is changing it in the background, we can't tell because the text effectively looks the exact same. And finally, what if I want to delete a tweet? So let's just delete the first tweet that's in our array of tweets. I'm just going to go back and change the syntax a little bit. We'll say tweets.delete. And then we just need to pass in the ID of whichever tweet we want to destroy. So in this case, since we did tweets.find1 to get our first tweet, now we just say tweet._ID, and it will delete that tweet from our tweets collection. There's no second parameter here because we're not updating the data, so we wouldn't need to tell it anything else other than the ID of which tweet we want to destroy. So go back to our app. If I click on this, oh, not quite. So I've made a small mistake apparently. 1 second. Oh, my bad. It's actually, sorry, it's not delete. The call is .remove, which is a little bit clearer anyways. So we will be removing the tweet with that ID, which is the very first tweet, from our tweets collection. Let's go back to our app. We should click this. And we saw the very first thing got deleted. If we click it again, this one was the first one was removed. Remove, remove, remove. And if I keep clicking this, you'll see I'll slowly delete all the tweets out of the collection. So to summarize, our data flow is the same thing that we used with session. But now the main difference between session and collection is that collection behaves more like an array. And there's typically three things we'll do on that array. We will want to insert new objects. We will want to update existing objects. And we want to remove existing objects. So these are the three things that you should remember: insert, update, and remove. And for the second two, for update and remove, if you want to get access to a certain object, you have to grab the ._ID field. This field right here is a unique identifier for every single object inserted into a collection. And that's what you'll use to reference existing objects for updating or removing them. Now, if you want to get objects out, there's a couple ways to do it. As you saw earlier, we can do tweets.find. This returns every tweet. Or we could do tweets.find1, returns the first tweet. There are additional queries that you can read about in the documentation if you want to learn about other ways to grab the tweets out. Because a lot of times you don't want to grab every single tweet ever, right? Because there might be a lot of those. So you may want to grab only the most recent 50 tweets that were created, for example. And so there's a syntax to do that as well. But fundamentally, these are the basics of what you should know. You should know to insert new objects, update existing objects, remove existing objects, reference them with the ._ID field, and then you can query them to get multiple or just one of those objects back. In future videos, we will be talking about how to add users into our application. Users are basically just a collection that has objects that represent each user account.